The day an Apache woman paid more money than anyone else for a captive cowboy, every man in the trading camp thought she had lost her mind. The desert sun hung low over the Arizona territory, turning the dust in the air into sheets of gold. Luke Bennett sat alone beneath a rough wooden shelter at the edge of a remote trading post nearly 40 miles from the nearest town. His hat was gone. His horse was gone. His plans were gone too. 3 days earlier, he had been driving cattle south toward a buyer near Tucson. Then a flash flood had scattered part of the herd, damaged his wagon, and left him stranded among strangers who seemed more interested in profit than helping a man get back on his feet. The trading camp itself was little more than a collection of wagons, tents, and temporary buildings gathered around a dusty well. Travelers came and went. Deals were made. Supplies changed hands. Out there, almost everything had a price. Luke had learned that quickly. He leaned back against a support post and stared across the camp. Men shouted over livestock. Merchants argued over freight. Horses stamped their hooves in the heat. The smell of leather, dust, and wood smoke drifted through the afternoon air. Then something unusual happened. Conversations began to fade. Heads turned toward the northern trail. Riders were approaching. Luke glanced up. A small Apache group entered the camp at a calm pace. They did not look interested in trade. They looked as though they had come for a reason. At their center rode a young woman. Her dark hair moved gently in the desert breeze. Sunlight reflected from turquoise beads woven into her buckskin clothing. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that never needed to announce itself. Luke watched only briefly before looking away. He had his own problems. Yet a few minutes later, he noticed the same woman standing beside one of the traders near the center of camp. They were speaking seriously. Money changed hands. More money than Luke expected. The trader's eyes widened. Several nearby men exchanged surprised looks. Whatever she was buying, it clearly mattered. The discussion continued for several minutes. Then the trader pointed directly toward Luke. Luke frowned. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. The woman followed the trader's gesture. Her eyes met his across the camp. Calm, focused, certain. Moments later, she began walking toward him. Luke straightened instinctively. The sounds of the trading post seemed quieter now. Even the wind felt still. When she stopped in front of him, neither spoke at first. She studied him carefully, as though comparing reality against some expectation only she understood. Finally, Luke broke the silence. Can I help you? The woman looked at him for another second. Then she gave a small nod. You already have. Luke blinked. I do not believe we have met. A faint smile touched her face. No. Again, silence followed. Luke waited for an explanation. None came. Instead, the trader approached carrying a folded document. He looked almost amused. Congratulations, cowboy, the man said. Luke frowned. On what? The trader handed him the paper. You belong to her party now. Luke stared at the document, then at the woman, then back at the document. The trader chuckled and walked away before Luke could ask another question. Dust swirled across the camp between them. Somewhere nearby, a horse whinnied softly. Luke looked at the woman again. Mind telling me what exactly is going on? The woman glanced toward the western horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. Then she looked back at him and said the last thing Luke Bennett expected to hear. You should come with me. There are things you need to know. Luke Bennett had spent most of his life making decisions for himself. That was why the next hour felt so strange. He followed the Apache woman out of the trading camp just as the last light of afternoon stretched across the desert. The trader had returned his hat and a few remaining belongings, but nobody seemed interested in explaining why a complete stranger had paid such a large sum to claim responsibility for him. Every time Luke asked a question, he received the same answer. Ask her. Unfortunately, she appeared in no hurry to provide explanations. The woman rode several yards ahead on a dark chestnut horse, while Luke followed on a borrowed gelding supplied by the trader. The desert rolled endlessly around them in waves of red earth and scattered sagebrush. The air smelled of dust, leather, and distant rain that would probably never reach the ground. For nearly 2 miles, neither spoke. Finally, Luke had enough. You have a name? The woman glanced back over her shoulder. Naya White Feather. Luke nodded. Luke Bennett. I know. That answer only deepened the mystery. Luke frowned. You know? Yes. How? Naya looked forward again. Later. Luke sighed heavily. The sun continued sinking toward the western horizon. Shadows lengthened across the trail. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk drifted above the canyon walls, riding invisible currents of warm air. The silence returned. Yet this time it felt different. Not uncomfortable. Intentional. As if Naya was waiting for the right moment to say something important. After another hour, they entered a narrow canyon where towering red cliffs rose on both sides. The temperature cooled noticeably. Cottonwood trees appeared near a winding stream. Then Luke saw the settlement. Dozens of lodges stood among the trees. Thin streams of smoke rose from evening cooking fires. Children ran between buildings while horses grazed nearby. The entire place seemed peaceful. More peaceful than most towns Luke had visited. As they approached, people began noticing them. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Several children pointed excitedly. An older woman standing near a fire smiled when she saw Luke. One elderly man removed his hat respectfully as he passed. Luke slowed his horse. Do they know me? Naya almost smiled. Not exactly. That answer made even less sense than the others. They continued through the settlement. Everywhere Luke looked, people seemed unusually pleased to see him. Not curious. Not suspicious. Pleased. The reaction unsettled him more than hostility would have. He had never been here before. He knew none of these people. Yet somehow they behaved as though they had been expecting him. As dusk settled over the canyon, Naya led him toward a small lodge near the edge of the settlement. A lantern burned outside beside a wooden chair. The place looked clean, comfortable, and completely prepared. Luke dismounted slowly. Whose lodge is this? Naya handed her horse's reins to a nearby boy. Yours. Luke stared at her. Mine. She nodded. For now. Before he could ask another question, the same boy returned carrying a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. Without speaking, he placed it on the chair outside the lodge and hurried away. Luke looked down. The cloth had partially opened during the short journey. Something silver gleamed beneath the fading light. A bracelet, or perhaps a bracelet-like ring of polished silver decorated with small turquoise stones. Naya noticed him staring. For the first time all day, uncertainty flickered across her face. Do not worry about that tonight, she said quietly. Then she turned toward the center of the settlement. Luke looked from the silver object to her retreating figure. Naya. She stopped. What? Luke folded his arms. I have a feeling everyone here knows something I do not. Naya stood motionless for several seconds. Then she answered without turning around. That makes two of us. And with that, she disappeared into the growing darkness while the silver object continued reflecting firelight beside his door. Luke slept lightly that night. The unfamiliar sounds of the settlement drifted through the darkness long after the campfires had faded into glowing embers. Wind moved softly through the cottonwood trees. Horses shifted in distant corrals. Somewhere near the stream, water flowed steadily over smooth stone. Yet none of those sounds kept him awake. His thoughts did. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the silver bracelet resting outside his lodge. He saw the strange smiles, the respectful greetings, the way people looked at him as though he had arrived carrying news only they understood. By sunrise, he had more questions than answers. The first light of morning spilled across the canyon, turning the cliffs gold. Luke stepped outside and immediately noticed the bracelet was gone. Only a faint impression remained in the dust where it had rested. He stared at the empty spot for several seconds. Then a cheerful voice interrupted his thoughts. Good morning. Luke turned. An elderly woman stood nearby carrying a basket of fresh bread. She smiled warmly and handed him a piece before he could refuse. You should eat. Thank you, Luke said. Can you tell me where the bracelet went? The woman smiled even wider. It is a beautiful morning, is it not? Then she continued walking. Luke watched her leave. That was not an answer. Throughout the day, the mystery only deepened. Everywhere he went, people treated him with unusual kindness. Children followed him through the settlement asking questions about horses and ranches. One young boy insisted on showing him a newly built corral. A blacksmith offered to repair the buckle on his saddle free of charge. Even the elders greeted him as though he were an honored guest. By afternoon, Luke had stopped asking direct questions because nobody seemed willing to answer them. Instead, he began paying attention. And the more he observed, the stranger everything became. He noticed people occasionally glancing toward him and then exchanging knowing smiles. He noticed several women whispering when he passed. Most of all, he noticed a recurring symbol, the silver bracelet. Sometimes it appeared hanging near a doorway. Other times it rested beside a cooking fire or atop a wooden table. Always the same polished silver. Always decorated with small turquoise stones. It seemed to follow him everywhere. Late in the afternoon, Luke finally found Naya near the stream at the edge of the settlement. She was washing vegetables beside the water while sunlight shimmered across the surface. He walked directly toward her. "I need answers." Naya glanced up without surprise. "About what?" Luke laughed. "That might be the most unfair question I have ever heard." A faint smile touched her face. "Then choose one." Luke folded his arms. "Why does everyone know my name?" "Because they heard it." "Why does everyone keep smiling at me?" "Because they are friendly." "Why does that silver bracelet keep appearing everywhere?" The smile disappeared. Naya lowered her eyes toward the flowing water. For the first time since they met, she seemed uncomfortable. That alone captured Luke's attention. "There it is," he said, quietly. "That look." Naya remained silent. The stream continued flowing between them. Cottonwood leaves rustled overhead. Finally she spoke. "Some traditions are difficult to explain. Try me." She picked up a smooth stone from the riverbank and turned it thoughtfully in her hand. "Not yet." Luke sighed. "You realize that answer makes everything worse." To his surprise, Naya laughed softly. Then she stood and brushed dust from her dress. "Come to the evening fire tonight." Luke frowned. "Why?" Naya looked directly into his eyes. For a brief moment, all humor vanished from her expression. Only seriousness remained. "Because there is something I should have told you the day I brought you here." Then she walked away. As Luke watched her disappear among the lodges, he noticed something lying beside the stream where she had been sitting. The silver bracelet. And for the first time, he had the unmistakable feeling that it had been left there for him to find. The evening arrived slowly, painting the canyon in shades of amber and gold. Long shadows stretched across the settlement while the last warmth of the day lingered on the red cliffs above. Luke spent most of the afternoon thinking about the silver bracelet. More accurately, he spent the afternoon trying not to think about it. The effort failed completely. Every road led back to the same questions. Why had Naya purchased responsibility for him? Why did everyone seem to know a secret he did not? And why did a simple piece of silver jewelry appear to hold so much importance? As the sun disappeared behind the western ridge, lanterns began glowing throughout the settlement. Smoke drifted upward from cooking fires. Families gathered for the evening meal. Somewhere nearby, laughter echoed through the trees. Yet beneath the peaceful atmosphere, Luke felt tension building. Naya had told him there was something he should have known from the beginning. Whatever it was, tonight he would finally hear it. A large fire burned near the center of the settlement. Several elders sat nearby speaking quietly among themselves. Naya stood alone at the edge of the firelight. The flames reflected softly against the turquoise beads, woven into her dress. When she noticed Luke approaching, her expression became serious. Not fearful, not uncertain. Serious. Luke stopped beside her. "You finally ready to explain all of this?" Naya looked into the fire before answering. "I am." For several moments neither spoke. The crackling flames filled the silence between them. Above, the first stars appeared against the darkening sky. Then Naya reached into a small leather pouch hanging from her belt. When her hand emerged, the silver bracelet rested in her palm. Firelight danced across the polished metal. Luke stared at it. Somehow the object seemed even more significant now than before. Naya held it carefully, as though handling something much older than silver. "Do you remember the trader at the camp?" she asked. "Hard to forget. When I paid him, I did not buy you." Luke frowned. "That is good to know because the paperwork suggested otherwise." A faint smile appeared, then vanished. "I purchased a right." Luke folded his arms. "A right to what?" Naya lowered her eyes to the bracelet. The fire crackled softly. Nearby conversations faded as though the night itself was listening. "Among some Apache families, there is an old custom." Luke waited. Naya took a slow breath. "If a woman uses her own wealth to free a man and brings him before her community, she earns the right to ask something important." Luke felt his stomach tighten. Not because he understood, because he was beginning to. Naya continued. "The bracelet represents that right." Luke stared at the silver band reflecting the firelight, then back at her. Suddenly, every strange smile, every respectful greeting, every whispered conversation began falling into place. "Ask what?" he said quietly. Naya looked directly into his eyes. The confidence he had seen at the trading camp was gone. For the first time, she appeared vulnerable, human, unsure of what answer she might receive. Then she extended the bracelet toward him. To become my husband. The words settled over the fire like drifting ash. Luke did not move. He simply stood there staring at her while the world around him seemed to pause. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse shifted its weight. The wind stirred through the cottonwood trees. Yet all Luke could hear were those 4 words. Naya slowly lowered her hand. You do not have to answer tonight, she said softly. In truth, I hoped you would not. Luke blinked. That was not the response he expected. Naya looked away toward the flames. Because there is much you still do not know, and much I have not told you. Luke Bennett had faced stampedes, droughts, and winters harsh enough to break stronger men. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for the conversation unfolding beside that fire. Long after Naya's words settled into the cool desert air, he remained silent. The silver bracelet rested between them, reflecting the orange glow of the flames. Around the settlement, people continued their evening routines, unaware that the mystery which had followed him since the trading camp had finally revealed itself. Or perhaps they were aware. Judging by the knowing smiles he had received for the past 2 days, most of them probably knew long before he did. Luke rubbed a hand across his jaw and stared into the fire. You brought me all the way here for that. Naya shook her head immediately. No. The answer came so quickly that he looked up. No. If that had been my reason, I would have asked on the first day. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Naya carefully closed her fingers around the bracelet and lowered it into her lap. The custom gave me the right to ask. It never gave me the right to expect. The fire crackled softly between them. For the first time since the conversation began, Luke felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Then why did you do it? Naya looked toward the darkness beyond the settlement. Her expression changed. Not embarrassment. Sadness. Because I remembered you. Luke frowned. We have never met. You do not remember me. The answer only deepened the mystery. Naya smiled faintly. 8 years ago, near Dry Creek Crossing. A wagon accident during a storm. Luke searched his memory. The name stirred something distant. A muddy road. Heavy rain. A broken wagon wheel. Then a faint image surfaced. A frightened teenage girl stranded beside an overturned wagon. That was you. Naya nodded. Most people rode past. Luke stared at her. Slowly the memory sharpened. He remembered stopping to help. Helping repair a damaged axle. Sharing food before continuing south. Nothing extraordinary. Just the sort of thing any decent person should have done. That was one afternoon, he said quietly. Naya smiled. It was the worst day of my life until you arrived. Luke looked away toward the fire. He had completely forgotten the event. Yet for her, it had remained important for nearly a decade. The realization unsettled him in a different way. You bought my freedom because of that. Naya shook her head. No, I bought your freedom because I heard what happened at the trading camp and recognized your name. She paused. The reason I brought you here is because I wanted the chance to repay a kindness that was never repaid. The wind drifted through the cottonwood trees. Somewhere nearby, laughter echoed from another fire. Luke found himself staring at Naya in a way he never had before. The mystery surrounding her suddenly seemed less mysterious. Not because he understood everything, because he understood her heart. Then Naya surprised him again. She removed the bracelet from her lap and placed it gently on a nearby log. Forget about the custom for now. Luke raised an eyebrow. That seems difficult. A genuine laugh escaped her. Then try. For several minutes, they simply sat beside the fire talking. Not about marriage. Not about traditions. About horses. Ranches weather. Childhood memories. The conversation felt unexpectedly easy. Yet as the evening deepened, another shadow slowly crept into the edges of their peaceful moment. Several elders were gathered nearby, studying maps beneath lantern light. Riders arrived from the eastern trail, carrying messages. Their faces looked concerned. Luke noticed immediately. Years on the frontier had taught him to recognize trouble before it arrived. He nodded toward the elders. Something wrong. Naya followed his gaze. The warmth left her expression. Maybe. That does not sound encouraging. Naya watched the lantern-lit gathering in silence. Then she spoke quietly. There are people who want the land around our springs. Luke felt the atmosphere shift at once. The fire still burned. The stars still shone overhead. But suddenly the night no longer felt quite as peaceful as it had a few moments earlier. The next morning arrived beneath a sky so clear it seemed endless. Sunlight spilled across the canyon walls, turning the red stone bright as fire. Yet despite the beauty of the day, a quiet tension lingered throughout the settlement. Luke noticed it immediately. The smiles were still there. The greetings were still warm. But conversations lowered when riders approached. Elders gathered more frequently. Maps appeared on tables where maps had not been before. Something was coming. After breakfast, Luke found himself helping repair a section of fencing near the horse pasture. The work felt familiar, comfortable. The steady rhythm of tools and timber gave his thoughts a place to rest. Several young boys followed him around asking questions about ranch life. One wanted to know how many cattle a man could manage alone. Another wanted to know whether Texas really felt as large as people claimed. By midday, Luke had nearly forgotten the uneasy feeling from the night before. Then Naya appeared. She carried a folded document in one hand and wore the same thoughtful expression he had seen beside the fire. "You work quickly," she said. Luke glanced at the repaired fence. A broken fence and a loose horse are old enemies of mine. That earned a small smile. "The horses appreciate your effort." "Good. I was hoping to stay on their good side." For a moment, the tension disappeared. Then Naya held up the document. "My grandfather would like to speak with you." Luke wiped dust from his hands. "That sounds official." "It is." Together, they walked toward the center of the settlement. Along the way, Luke noticed more riders arriving from the eastern trail. Their horses carried the dust of long travel. Most headed directly toward the elders' gathering place. Whatever news they brought, it clearly mattered. Beneath a large cottonwood tree, several elders sat around a rough wooden table covered with maps and papers. Naya's grandfather stood as they approached. The older man's face carried the calm wisdom Luke had come to respect, but today there was concern beneath it. "Luke," the elder said, "please sit." Luke took a seat. The elder spread several documents across the table. Survey maps, property records, handwritten notes. The sort of paperwork Luke had encountered many times while negotiating grazing rights across Arizona. "Do these look familiar?" the elder asked. Luke studied them carefully. After a few moments, he nodded. "Land claims." "Yes." The old man folded his hands. "There is a company in Tucson that wants control of the springs east of our valley." Luke frowned. Water meant everything in the Southwest. Without water, ranches failed. Farms disappeared. Entire communities suffered. "Do they have a legitimate claim?" he asked. One of the elders sighed. "They believe they do." Naya shook her head. "Or they want others to believe they do." Luke continued examining the papers. Some looked ordinary. Others felt strangely incomplete. Missing dates. Missing references. Small details. Nothing obvious. Yet enough to make him pause. "When are they coming?" he asked. 3 days, the elder replied. Silence settled over the table. 3 days. Not much time. Luke leaned back in his chair and looked around at the faces watching him. Suddenly he understood why he had been invited. The issue was not simply the documents. It was who would be listening when those documents arrived. Naya seemed to read his thoughts. "Many officials will trust a rancher from outside the tribe before they trust us." The truth of her words landed heavily. Luke looked toward the canyon entrance where sunlight shimmered above the distant trail. He had originally planned to leave days ago. He could still leave now. Nothing required him to stay. The bracelet, the custom, the question Naya had asked beside the fire. None of it obligated him to become involved. Yet as he looked around the table, he realized something had changed. These people were no longer strangers. And for the first time since arriving, Luke found himself wondering not when he would leave the settlement, but whether he wanted to leave at all. The 3 days passed faster than Luke expected. Each morning began with work and ended with conversations that lasted longer than the night before. He repaired gates, helped move horses, and taught a group of eager children how to read the weather by studying clouds above the canyon walls. The settlement gradually stopped feeling like a place he was visiting. It began feeling like a place where people knew his name before he spoke it. Yet beneath the routines of daily life, everyone remained aware of the approaching deadline. The company from Tucson was coming. On the morning of the 3rd day, a line of wagons appeared on the eastern trail just after sunrise. Dust rose behind them like a pale curtain stretching across the desert. Riders moved alongside the wagons carrying survey equipment, document cases, and supplies. Nobody in the settlement seemed surprised. They had been expecting this moment. Luke stood beside Naya near the central gathering area as the visitors entered the valley. The contrast between the two groups was impossible to miss. The newcomers wore clean coats despite the long journey. Their boots shined. Their papers were organized inside polished leather folders. Everything about them suggested confidence. The confidence of people who believed they already knew the outcome. The meeting began beneath a large canvas shelter erected near the center of the settlement. Elders gathered around a long wooden table. Maps were unrolled. Survey records were displayed. The company representatives spoke politely, but Luke quickly noticed something familiar in their manner. They explained rather than discussed. They assumed rather than listened. Most importantly, they seemed to expect agreement. Naya sat beside her grandfather throughout the proceedings. Her expression remained calm, though Luke could see the tension hidden behind her composure. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the documents covering the table. The springs east of the valley represented more than water. They represented history, survival, home. The discussion continued for hours. Several claims were presented. Boundaries were debated. Old survey markers were referenced. By midday, the canyon air had grown hot enough to shimmer above the ground. Yet the atmosphere beneath the shelter felt even heavier. During a short break, Luke stepped outside into the sunlight. Naya followed. For several moments they stood in silence watching the distant hills beyond the settlement. "You have been quiet today," she said. Luke nodded, listening. And he looked back toward the shelter. "Some of those papers bother me." Naya immediately turned toward him. "Why?" Luke rubbed a thumb along his jaw. "I cannot explain it yet. Something feels off." Hope flickered briefly across her face. Then caution returned. "You are not certain." "No." Luke smiled faintly. "And I dislike being uncertain." Before either could say more, one of the elders approached. He carried several additional documents discovered among older records. Luke accepted them and began reading. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then one date caught his attention. He turned a page. Then another. A second inconsistency appeared. Small, easy to miss, but real. His expression changed immediately. The elder noticed. So did Naya. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Luke looked up. For the first time all day, confidence replaced uncertainty in his eyes. "I think I found something." The afternoon meeting resumed moments later. The company representatives returned to the table carrying the same confidence they had arrived with. Around them, elders took their seats. Families watched from a respectful distance. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Luke sat beside Naya and carefully arranged the documents before him. Across the table, one of the representatives smiled politely. "Shall we continue?" Luke looked down at the papers, then slowly back up. "Yes," he said. "I believe we should." The afternoon sun hung directly above the canyon when the meeting resumed. Heat shimmered beyond the canvas shelter, blurring the distant ridges into waves of gold and red. Around the long wooden table, everyone returned to their places. The company representatives sat with the same confidence they had carried all morning. Survey maps remained spread before them. Leather folders rested neatly at their elbows. Across from them, the elders watched in patient silence. Naya sat beside her grandfather. Luke took the seat next to her, the stack of newly discovered documents resting before him. The representative leading the discussion smiled politely. "As I was explaining, our claim follows all established survey boundaries recognized by the county." Several pages were slid across the table. Luke listened without interruption. The man continued speaking for several minutes, citing dates, signatures, and measurements. To anyone unfamiliar with land records, the presentation sounded convincing. That was exactly why it worried Luke. When the representative finally paused, Luke reached forward and picked up one of the documents. "May I ask a question?" The man nodded confidently. "Of course." Luke held up the page. "This survey approval references an office in Pima County." "Correct. And this approval is dated 12 years ago." "Also correct." Luke glanced down at the document once more, then back at the representative. "There is only one problem." The smile on the man's face faded slightly. Luke placed a second document beside the first. The office named here did not exist until 3 years later. Silence settled across the table. Several elders exchanged quick looks. The representative blinked. "That cannot be right." Luke slid the second paper forward. "County records say otherwise." The man immediately reached for the document. Nearby surveyors leaned in to read. Their expressions changed as they examined the date. Luke continued before anyone could interrupt. I thought it might be a simple mistake. Then I checked the witness signatures. He lifted another page. 2 of the men listed here had already retired before these records were supposedly filed. More silence followed. Outside the shelter, even the children playing nearby seemed quieter. Naya watched Luke carefully, saying nothing. The company representatives hurried through their folders, searching for explanations. None appeared. The confidence that had defined their arrival slowly began slipping away. One surveyor adjusted his glasses and studied the paperwork again. Another shook his head. Finally, the lead representative cleared his throat. There may have been clerical errors. Luke nodded calmly. Perhaps. He tapped the stack of documents. But there seemed to be quite a few of them. A ripple of quiet amusement passed among several elders. Not mockery. Relief. For the first time all day, the conversation had shifted. The discussion continued for another hour. No raised voices. No threats. Just facts. Dates. Records. Evidence. One inconsistency led to another. Small details that individually meant little, but together created a very different picture. By late afternoon, the company representatives no longer spoke with certainty. They requested additional review from county officials before moving forward with any claim. The request was granted immediately. The meeting ended soon afterward. As people filed out from beneath the shelter, a sense of quiet victory spread through the settlement. Not celebration, not triumph, something deeper. The feeling that truth had finally been given room to speak. Outside, the visitors began preparing their wagons for departure. Dust rose once more along the eastern trail. Luke stood beside Naya watching them load their equipment. Neither spoke for a while. The canyon breeze moved gently through the cottonwood trees overhead. Finally, Naya looked at him. You could have left days ago. Luke smiled faintly. You have mentioned that before. Because it is true. He watched the departing wagons disappear beyond the ridge. Then he looked back toward the settlement. Toward the families gathered near evening fires. Toward the children racing through the open spaces between lodges. Toward the place that no longer felt unfamiliar. Maybe, he said quietly, but I am starting to think leaving would have been the harder choice. The valley felt different after the visitors left. Not louder, not quieter, lighter. The tension that had lingered over the settlement for days seemed to drift away with the wagons disappearing beyond the eastern ridge. Evening settled gently across the canyon. Lanterns glowed beneath cottonwood trees. The smell of cedar smoke floated through the cooling air. Families gathered near cooking fires while children chased one another between the lodges. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm. Yet for Luke Bennett, one final question remained unanswered. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Sunlight spilled across the red cliffs while a gentle breeze carried the sound of flowing water from the nearby springs. Luke stood outside the lodge that had become unexpectedly familiar. His saddle rested on a wooden rail. His belongings had already been packed. The horse waiting beside him shifted impatiently. Everything was prepared. He could leave at any moment. For several minutes, he simply stood there looking across the settlement. When he first arrived, every face had been a stranger. Every smile had felt suspicious. Every kindness had carried a mystery. Now he recognized nearly everyone. The blacksmith repairing tools near the center fire. The children who still asked endless questions about ranching. The elderly woman who brought him fresh bread every morning whether he requested it or not. Somewhere along the way, the unfamiliar had become familiar. Footsteps approached behind him. Luke did not need to turn around to know who it was. Naya stopped beside him. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable now, the sort shared between people who no longer needed words to fill every moment. Finally, she looked at the packed saddle. You are leaving. Luke nodded. That was the plan. Naya smiled faintly. Luke glanced toward her. I have learned plans do not survive very long around here. A soft laugh escaped her. Then her expression grew serious. From beneath her shawl, she removed a small cloth bundle. Luke recognized it instantly. The same careful wrapping he had seen before. The same object that had followed him since his first night in the settlement. Naya placed it in his hands. Take it. Luke slowly unfolded the cloth. The silver bracelet rested inside. Sunlight reflected from the turquoise stones. For a moment, neither moved. Then Naya spoke quietly. The custom is finished. Luke looked up. Finished. She nodded. You owe me nothing. You never did. Her voice remained calm. but he could hear the emotion beneath it. The right I earned by bringing you here belongs to the past now. She gently closed his fingers around the bracelet. You are completely free. The words hung between them. Luke looked down at the bracelet, then toward the horse waiting beside the trail, then back at Naya. A few weeks ago, freedom would have meant only one thing. Saddle the horse. Ride away. Return to the life he had always known. Yet standing there beneath the Arizona sun, that answer no longer felt as simple as it once had. Naya stepped back. Goodbye, Luke. She turned before he could respond. One step, then another. She had nearly reached the path leading toward the springs when Luke finally spoke. Naya. She stopped. Slowly she turned around. Luke looked at the bracelet resting in his hand. The object no longer felt mysterious. It no longer represented obligation, tradition, or expectation. It represented a choice. His choice. He slipped the silver bracelet onto his wrist and smiled. The surprise in Naya's eyes lasted only a second before warmth replaced it. Luke left his saddle exactly where it was. The horse could wait. Some roads stretched across deserts. Others led somewhere far more important. As the morning sun climbed higher above the canyon, he walked away from the trail and toward her instead.